On a night when Aspen Ridge vanished in white, Adrian Westcott, a lonely CEO and foster care survivor, turns his silver pocket watch, engraved with the words, "Keep warm, Dad." Then a knock. At the door, a shivering boy with a baby, whispering, "Please, just one night." Compassion meets fear. Is this a mistake, or the family he was too late to find? The glass walls hummed in the wind, as if the house itself were bracing its ribs. Aspen Ridge had vanished behind white curtains. The pines bowed low, and the driveway lights glowed like islands in a frozen sea. Adrian Westcott stood in his great room in a tailored navy suit he hadn't bothered to change out of, the red tie loosened but still neat from muscle memory. He moved with the steady control that had built North Star Cold Logistics, yet his eyes, deep blue, framed by thick brows, wandered like a boy's toward the storm he could not command. He turned the silver pocket watch in his palm, slow and careful, the way you might steady a newborn's head. Tiny snowflakes hissed against the glass, and the furnace kicked a low sigh through the vents. On the case, the engraving caught the firelight. "Keep warm, Dad." He rubbed the dash with his thumb until the metal heated beneath his skin. "I hear you," he murmured, a private confession to a father gone too long. "I'm trying." North Star's dashboard hovered on his wall screen. A dozen refrigerated trucks crawled across the Rockies like blue beads on a string. De-icing crews were on call at the private hangar. The snow had grounded his jet and most of his fleet, the same fleet that ferried hearts and insulin and lab samples in summer, champagne and executives in winter. Logistics ran on timing and trust. He'd bought those two things with money, with discipline, with a spine of steel. They had never quieted the rooms of this house. The wind pitched higher, and a pressure change made the kitchen door tap its frame. For a second, he imagined the old duplex he'd once shared with 3 foster boys, a place where every door had a draft and every night had a test. He used to keep his sneakers on while sleeping, always ready to run. A memory floated up without asking permission. A social worker's coat smelled of mothballs, the click of a latch, the sensation of being passed from one careful hand to another like a box of fragile glass. The last time he saw his father, he was 12. A hospital room. Winter sun bouncing off a snowbank into his eyes, a man with calloused hands closing his boy's fingers around a watch. "Keep warm, kid. It won't hold you, but it might remind you to hold yourself." Adrian slipped the watch into his vest pocket. The weight settled against his chest like a heartbeat. He crossed to the window and watched the nearest pine bend and spring, a humble act of survival. On the marble island behind him, a single place setting waited beside a bowl that had once held soup he didn't taste. He'd been too late from the hangar to meet anyone for dinner, too conditioned to call anyone anyway. His phone buzzed. A board member, another about tomorrow's deal briefing. He ignored them both and listened to the house breathe. He tried to read. He tried to answer an email about a new cold storage facility outside Denver. He tried to lower the shades, then raise them again, guilty at the thought of hiding from a horizon that wasn't looking for him. The watch ticked. The storm deepened. He caught his reflection in the glass, a striking man in control, hair dark with gray at the temples, square jaw set like a promise, handsome, capable, alone. "Keep warm," he said again, but the words landed like a coin in an empty well. The lights flickered once, twice, then held. He felt the old boy's reflex tighten his back. In another life, flicker meant move, find the matches, count the cans. In this life, it meant a generator he could service in under 15 minutes and a phone number that always picked up. Somehow, the second life had arranged itself to protect the first, but had never managed to soothe it. He walked the silent hall, a framed photograph of a runway in winter, a model jet, silver on a walnut shelf. He paused beneath the staircase and rested a palm on the banister's cold curve. "What would you do?" he asked the air. "If you finally got everything you wanted, and it still didn't feel like anything?" The house answered with a small sound. Not the wind, not the furnace, something thin and human against the roar outside. He stilled. The sound came again, a faint, uncertain tap, then a longer pause, then two in quick succession, as if someone had practiced courage and then spent it. Adrian turned his head toward the front door. For a breath he considered the sensible explanation. The storm throwing branches, the latch shifting in the frame. He felt the watch's weight shift when he pivoted, the chain clicking softly against the vest. The room seemed to narrow to a single line, from his chest to the door, from the boy he had been to the man who now owned everything between. The tapping stopped. The wind gathered itself and hurled another white sheet across the lawn. He stood very still, listening to nothing and to everything. A man trained by loss to hesitate and by leadership to move. Then, from the threshold, came one clear knock. Not the house, not the wind. The storm pressed against the mansion's glass walls like a living thing, howling, clawing, rattling the frame. Adrian Westcott sat in his study, papers untouched, his father's pocket watch heavy in his palm. The silence had become so absolute that at first he thought he'd imagined it, the faintest knock at the door. Then it came again, louder, desperate. Adrian frowned, slipping the watch into his vest pocket. Visitors never came here, not in the heart of Aspen Ridge during a blizzard. Rising, he crossed the marble floor, each step echoing in the vast emptiness. Another knock, urgent now, rattled the heavy brass handle. He opened the door. The wind shoved inside, carrying snow and a figure so small he nearly didn't see him at first. A boy, no more than 9, stood on the doorstep. His jeans were soaked, clinging to thin legs. His jacket was threadbare, sleeves torn, and his breath puffed in sharp white clouds. In his trembling arms, wrapped in a hospital blanket that was already damp with snow, lay a baby, its lips faintly blue. The boy's eyes lifted to Adrian's, wide, dark, and shining with something more than cold. "Please, sir," the boy whispered, voice cracking. "Just one night. We don't have anywhere else." Adrian's hand tightened on the doorframe. The boy swayed under the baby's weight, nearly stumbling forward as if his legs might give out. Snowflakes clung to his lashes, melting into tiny rivers down his cheeks. The CEO's instinct was to retreat, to shut the door on chaos. He had built his life on order, on precision, on never letting vulnerability in. But the baby's chest rose shallowly, a fragile rhythm against the storm. The sight cut through every defense he'd sharpened over years. "What's your name?" Adrian asked, his voice lower than he expected. "Luca," the boy said quickly. "This is Noah. He's only 3 months. Please, he's so cold." The name struck him, though he didn't know why. Adrian's eyes dropped to the baby again. So small, so breakable. His heart thudded, a memory flickering of his own childhood winters spent shivering in foster homes, clutching that same pocket watch for warmth. Snow whipped harder across the porch. Luca's thin arms shook violently now, his teeth chattering. Adrian swallowed, his pulse racing. He could still send them away. Call someone. Pretend this never happened. That was the life he knew, controlled, sealed off, untouchable. But he didn't move. He reached out instead, steadying the boy's shoulder before he collapsed. "Come inside," Adrian said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. "Hurry, before you both freeze." Luca's eyes widened, the barest glimmer of relief sparking within them. He stepped forward into the warmth, clutching Noah close, snow dripping onto the polished marble floor. Adrian shut the door against the storm, sealing them inside. For the first time in years, his house was no longer silent. It carried the fragile sound of children breathing. The foyer lights cast a warm glow across the marble, but the boy still trembled as if the storm had followed him inside. Adrian pulled a blanket from the hall closet and draped it around Luca's shoulders. The boy held his baby brother tighter, eyes darting to every corner of the mansion. High ceilings, gleaming floors, walls of glass that revealed only the blizzard's fury. Adrian crouched, his tailored suit tightening across broad shoulders, his deep blue eyes fixed on the tiny bundle. "Let me see him," he said gently. Luca hesitated, clutching the baby with a protective grip. "I won't hurt him," Adrian assured, his voice softened by something he rarely allowed: memory. Slowly, Luca loosened his arms. Adrian reached out, his large hands uncharacteristically cautious as he lifted the infant. The child's skin was pale, his breaths shallow and uneven. Adrian felt a cold dread crawl up his spine. He had seen numbers on screens collapse, markets crash, but nothing struck like this fragile rhythm of a newborn's chest. Adrian glanced back at Luca. The boy was still shivering, his small fists clenching the blanket. But it wasn't only cold that tightened his body, it was fear. Fear of being turned away again. "Who told you to come here?" Adrian asked, adjusting the baby against his arm. "No one," Luca whispered, shaking his head. "I saw the lights. I thought maybe someone would help." His eyes filled, but he bit them back. "Please, sir, don't make us leave." Adrian's chest tightened. He turned toward the fire crackling faintly in the great room and carried the baby closer, gesturing for Luca to follow. The boy trailed behind, eyes wide as he took in the expensive leather chairs and towering stone hearth. As Adrian adjusted the baby before the flames, something caught his eye. Dangling from Luca's neck, half hidden beneath his torn jacket, was a small silver chain. At the end of it hung a pocket watch. Adrian froze. The boy shifted under his stare, instinctively cupping the watch with his hand. "It was my dad's," Luca said quickly. "He gave it to me before he went away." Adrian's blood pounded in his ears. Slowly, he pulled his own watch from his vest pocket, the heirloom his father had pressed into his palm decades ago. He turned it in the light, the engraved words shining back at him. "Keep warm. Dad." "Let me see yours," Adrian said softly. Luca hesitated, then lifted the chain. The casing was worn, scratched, but when Adrian leaned closer, his breath caught. The engraving, though faded, was the same. "Keep warm. Dad." The room seemed to shrink around them. Adrian's grip tightened on the infant, as though afraid he might vanish like a mirage. He looked at Luca, truly looked. The curve of his cheek, the stubborn lift of his chin, eyes that reflected both fear and defiance. Adrian's voice lowered, unsteady in a way he hadn't known in years. "Where did your father get this?" Luca blinked, his lip trembling. "I don't know. Mom said it was the only thing he left behind." The fire popped loudly, throwing sparks into the air. Adrian's heart hammered as the impossible began to take shape. He held both watches in his hands, the metal cold despite the fire's warmth. The boy stared back, waiting for judgment, for rescue, for something. And, for the first time in a long time, Adrian Westcott had no idea what to say. The firelight flickered against the glass walls, warming the baby's cheeks just enough to bring a faint flush. Adrian sat stiffly in the leather armchair, both pocket watches balanced in his palm, one polished and guarded, the other weathered by time. He couldn't tear his gaze from them. Across from him, Luca sat curled on the edge of the sofa, his thin frame swallowed by the blanket Adrian had given him. His dark eyes never left his baby brother, who now slept in Adrian's arms, chest rising more steadily with each breath. Adrian cleared his throat. "Tell me," he said softly, "what happened to your parents?" Luca's lips pressed tight before words came. "Dad's gone. I never knew him. Mom." His voice cracked and he swallowed hard. "She left last week. Said she couldn't take it anymore. She told me to take Noah and find help." Adrian's jaw clenched. The child couldn't be more than 9, yet he carried his brother through a blizzard. He thought of himself at that age, shuffled between foster homes, clutching the same watch as a proof someone once cared. "Where have you been staying?" Adrian asked. Luca shifted, ashamed. We tried the shelter, but it was full. Then, the bus station, until the police told us to leave. I just wanted somewhere warm. I thought if I knocked here, maybe—" He trailed off, fear flickering across his face. "You're not going to call the police, are you?" Adrian inhaled slowly. Every instinct honed from years in business urged him to stay detached, to hand this problem off. Yet, looking at Luca, he saw a shadow of himself, small, desperate, refusing to cry because no one ever came when he did. "No," Adrian said firmly. "Not tonight." The boy blinked, as if unused to mercy. Silence stretched. The storm pressed its weight against the windows, and in the crackle of the fire, Adrian heard his own heart. His defenses pushed back. "This isn't your problem. Don't get entangled." But the watches on the table glimmered like proof of something he couldn't ignore. "Luca," Adrian began, voice low, "where did your mother come from? Do you know if she had any family?" The boy shook his head. "She never talked about it. She worked at a diner once, but then she stopped showing up. She said we owed money to people. That's why she left, so they wouldn't hurt us." His chin trembled, though he fought to keep it steady. Adrian leaned back, his muscles taut beneath the fine wool of his suit. He had faced hostile takeovers and billion-dollar crises, yet this small boy's words rattled him more than any boardroom war. He glanced at Noah, sleeping soundly now against his chest. The infant shifted, tiny fingers brushing Adrian's tie. Something inside him cracked open. He felt the weight of years, his own mistakes, his own losses, press into the present. Luca's eyes lifted, fragile with hope and fear. "You'll let us stay? Just for tonight?" Adrian looked at the watches again, their twin engravings glinting in the firelight. He didn't yet understand the connection, but he knew this wasn't chance. He nodded slowly. "Yes, tonight you'll stay." Relief flooded the boy's face, so raw it pierced Adrian's chest. Luca leaned back into the sofa, exhaustion finally tugging him under. Within minutes, his small form curled tighter beneath the blanket, breaths evening into sleep. Adrian remained awake, staring at the fire. The pocket watches lay side by side on the table, two pieces of the same story. One he wasn't ready to face but could no longer ignore. In the silence of the great room, with two children sleeping under his roof, Adrian Westcott realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm about to break inside his life. The storm showed no mercy. All night, snow battered the glass mansion, piling against the walls in white drifts. Yet inside, the house was no longer silent. A boy's soft breathing rose from the sofa, and the faint cries of a baby punctuated the crackling fire. Adrian hadn't slept. He sat at the kitchen island with a mug of untouched coffee, the twin pocket watches between his hands. He turned them over again and again, as if the metal might give him answers. One engraved by his father's hand, the other worn, but carrying the same words. "Keep warm. Dad." He knew coincidence couldn't explain this, not in a town like Aspen Ridge, not on a night like this. By dawn, he had made his decision. Adrian called the one man he trusted with secrets, Marcus Hale, a private investigator he'd hired years ago during a merger dispute. Marcus answered groggily but alert, his voice gravelly through the speaker. "Boss?" "What's wrong?" Adrian's gaze shifted toward the sofa where Luca stirred restlessly under the blanket. "I need you to find someone. Fast. A woman. Late 20s, maybe 30. She goes by, I don't know her last name. She left her two boys behind." He paused, the words heavy in his throat. "One of them might be mine." Marcus was silent for a beat. "You want me to confirm that?" "Yes, discreetly. Start with local records, shelters, hospitals. She must have left a trail." Adrian's tone sharpened, the same tone that made billion-dollar deals move. But beneath it was a strain Marcus had never heard from him before. "Understood," Marcus said. "You'll have something within the day." Adrian ended the call, His reflection in the glass backsplash caught his eye. Tailored suit, square jaw, the picture of control. Yet behind his eyes was something fractured. He rose when Luca's voice broke the stillness. "Where are we?" the boy asked, blinking as he sat up, clutching the blanket. His hair stuck out in messy curls, his face pale with exhaustion. "You're safe," Adrian said simply. "This is my home." Luca looked around the vast kitchen, the gleaming counters, the high ceilings. "It doesn't feel like a home," he whispered. "It feels empty." The words struck like a blade. Adrian had built this mansion to be untouchable, but to a child it was just cold glass and silence. Noah stirred in his carrier seat on the counter, whimpering. Adrian stepped closer, awkwardly preparing a bottle he'd ordered from the emergency pantry. His hands, used to signing contracts and gripping jet controls, fumbled with the small cap. To his surprise, Luca slid from the stool and helped him. "You have to swirl it," the boy explained softly, demonstrating with a patience beyond his years. "Not shake too hard, or it gets bubbles, and then he'll cry." Adrian watched him, stunned by the care in his small hands. "You've done this before." "Every night," Luca said, not meeting his eyes. For a moment, Adrian couldn't breathe. This child had carried burdens no boy should. When the bottle was ready, Adrian took it and carefully fed Noah. The baby's lips latched, and his cries softened into steady gulps. Adrian's chest swelled with something he hadn't felt in decades, a fragile, aching tenderness. He glanced at Luca, who sat with his arms wrapped around himself, still wary. "Luca," Adrian said slowly, "I'm not going to let anything happen to you, or to Noah. Do you understand?" The boy's eyes flicked up, searching his face for truth. He didn't answer, but the tiniest spark of hope lit behind the fear. Adrian held it there, like a fragile flame against the storm. He didn't yet know the whole story, but he knew this. He could no longer walk away. The day dragged on, gray light smothered by the storm outside. Snow blanketed the pines in silence, yet inside the mansion, Adrian Westcott's thoughts roared. He carried his phone from room to room, waiting for Marcus's call. Every time it buzzed, his chest tightened. By mid-afternoon, it came. "Adrian," Marcus said, his tone clipped. "I dug fast. The mother's name is Emily Torres. She worked at a diner near your warehouse district years back. Went off the radar after piling up debt. Landlords, creditors. She vanished. But I found one more thing." Papers shuffled on his end. "Birth records. Luca Torres. Noah Torres. No father listed." Adrian leaned against the glass wall, his jaw tightening. "And?" Marcus hesitated. "There's a connection, Adrian. Emily lived in a rental 2 blocks from your Denver distribution hub. The dates line up 9-10 years ago. She would have crossed paths with you, maybe more." Adrian closed his eyes, memory tugging at him, faces blurred, nights he buried beneath ambition. He had been younger, reckless, convincing himself attachments only slowed him down. Yet the timeline fit, too perfectly. "I want proof," Adrian said. "DNA. Quietly. I can arrange it, but Adrian," Marcus's voice dropped, "you need to prepare yourself. If the test comes back positive..." Adrian cut him off. "Do it." He ended the call, staring at his reflection in the glass. A man in a navy suit, sharp and unyielding. But inside, cracks spread fast. Behind him, small footsteps echoed. Luca stood in the hall, his blanket trailing like a cape. His eyes narrowed. "You were talking about us." Adrian straightened. "I was making sure you're safe." "You don't believe me," Luca said, his chin lifting. "You think we're lying." The words struck harder than they should have. Adrian stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I don't think you're lying. But when a man like me has questions, he needs answers. That's how I protect people." Luca folded his arms, still skeptical. "Mom said grown-ups always promise things. Then they leave." Adrian's throat tightened. "I've made mistakes," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "But I'm not leaving you tonight. Or tomorrow. You hear me?" The boy studied him. Distrust etched deep, yet something wavered in his gaze. For a second, Adrian thought he saw recognition, like the child was measuring his face against a memory. Noah whimpered from the crib Adrian had ordered delivered that morning. Luca hurried over, lifting his baby brother with practiced care. Adrian watched them, a knot forming in his chest. Two children who belonged nowhere. Two watches with the same engraving. A mother who had vanished into debt and silence. Adrian turned away, gripping the cold metal of the watch in his pocket. He had built an empire by controlling every variable, but here were two lives that refused to be managed, only held. And, for the first time, Adrian feared not failure, but being too late. Night fell heavy over Aspen Ridge. The storm had eased, leaving the world outside buried in silence, but inside Adrian's mansion the weight of truth pressed harder than any snow. He stood in the great room, the fire dying low, Noah asleep in the crib. Across the room, Luca sat curled up on the sofa, eyes wide open despite his exhaustion. The boy's gaze tracked Adrian's every move, sharp with suspicion. Adrian poured himself a glass of water but didn't drink. "You should be sleeping," he said gently. Luca's voice cut the quiet. "Are you going to send us away?" Adrian turned, the boy's words like an echo of his own childhood fears. He shook his head. "No, I told you. You're safe here." "Safe? For how long?" Luca pressed. His tone was too steady for a 9-year-old. "Until we're trouble? Until people find out?" Adrian sat down across from him, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You've had to take care of too much, haven't you?" Luca didn't answer, but his silence was an admission. Adrian reached into his vest pocket and pulled out the polished silver watch. He set it on the table between them, the engraving catching the firelight. "This belonged to my father. He gave it to me when I was your age." Luca's eyes flickered to it, then back to his own chain. Slowly, he lifted the weathered watch from his neck, placing it beside Adrian's. The two heirlooms gleamed side by side, twins separated by time. Adrian's throat tightened. "Do you understand what this means?" Luca's small hands clenched. "I understand people leave things behind. Watches, promises, moms." His voice cracked, but he bit it back. "If you're saying you're my dad, why weren't you there?" The words hit like a blow. Adrian's chest burned with guilt he hadn't known how to name. He thought of Emily Torres, of debts, of choices made too quickly, of a boy carrying his brother through a storm while he sat alone in the glass walls. "I didn't know," Adrian said, voice rough. "If I had, I would have been there. I can't change the years I missed, but I can choose now." Luca's stare was sharp, searching. "What if I don't want you now?" The challenge pierced deeper than anger. It was fear. Fear that this was temporary, that help always ended. Adrian leaned closer, his voice steady. "Then I'll stay anyway, until you believe me." Silence stretched. The fire crackled. For a heartbeat, Adrian saw the boy's defenses falter, the faintest tremor in his lip. But he quickly turned his face away, curling tighter beneath the blanket. Adrian leaned back, the weight of fatherhood pressing heavier than any corporate deal. He could command fleets of planes and armies of staff, but this, winning the trust of a child who had been abandoned too many times, this was a different war. As Luca drifted into restless sleep, Adrian whispered into the quiet, "I'm not leaving you, son. Not now, not ever." But the question clawed inside him. Would the boy ever believe it? The mansion awoke to pale morning light, muted by snow that pressed heavy against the windows. Adrian Westcott stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, an apron tied awkwardly over his crisp shirt. He cracked eggs into a skillet, the hiss of butter loud in the silence. He had never cooked for anyone but himself, Behind him, small footsteps padded in. Luca stopped in the doorway, blanket draped around his shoulders like a cape. He blinked, surprised. "You're cooking?" Adrian allowed a faint smile. "Don't look so shocked. I can manage breakfast." He slid scrambled eggs onto a plate, set it at the island. "Sit. Eat." The boy climbed onto a stool, eyeing the food with suspicion before finally tasting it. His shoulders relaxed, just slightly. Noah cooed softly from the baby seat nearby, tiny fists reaching toward the light. Adrian paused mid-slice of toast watching the scene, two children filling the silence that had haunted his house for years. Still, shadows clung. Luca set down his fork. "People always say things they don't mean. Mom said she'd come back. She didn't. You say we're safe, but what if you change your mind?" Adrian leaned against the counter, his jaw tightening. "I can't change what your mother did, but I can choose what I do, and I'm telling you, I won't send you away." The boy studied him, unconvinced. Adrian reached into his pocket and pulled out the polished watch. He placed it on the counter beside Luca's worn one. "See this? My father gave me this the night before he died. He told me to keep warm, even when no one else was there. That watch got me through foster care, through years when I thought I was alone." His voice softened. "And now there are two of them. That doesn't happen by accident." Luca's eyes darted between the watches, his fingers brushing his own as though it anchored him. For a moment his defenses cracked. A knock shattered the fragile quiet. 3 sharp raps at the front door. Adrian stiffened, instinct kicking in. He crossed the hall swiftly and opened it. Marcus Hale stood there, snow dusting his coat. The private investigator's expression was tight, his jaw set. "We need to talk," he said low. Adrian stepped aside, but his eyes flicked toward the kitchen where Luca watched anxiously. "Not here," Adrian murmured. He led Marcus into the study, closing the door. Marcus dropped a file onto the desk. "I pulled strings at the county records. The DNA test you ordered?" He tapped the folder. "It's confirmed. Luca and Noah are yours." Adrian's chest clenched. He gripped the edge of the desk, the words both anchoring and shattering him. His sons. "There's more," Marcus added, lowering his voice. "Emily didn't just walk away. She was running. From debts, yes, but also from people. Someone connected to your industry. I don't know why yet. But she left those kids with nothing because she thought it would keep them alive." Adrian's throat tightened. He thought of Luca's wary eyes, Noah's fragile breaths, of promises broken before they even began. "God," he muttered, raking a hand through his hair. "I should have known. I should have been there." Marcus's gaze softened, unusual for a man used to shadows. "You know now. The question is, what will you do with it?" Adrian looked at the watches glinting in the firelight. The answer pressed hard against his chest. He would not fail them again. Snow had quieted the mountain by evening, blanketing the world in a hush that felt almost sacred. Inside the mansion, the fire glowed steady, but the tension between Adrian and Luca burned hotter than the flames. Marcus had gone, leaving behind the file that confirmed what Adrian already felt in his bones. Luca and Noah were his. Proof on paper couldn't soften the storm inside Adrian's chest. 9 years lost, a decade of silence he could never reclaim. He found Luca in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug with Noah cradled in his lap. The boy hummed softly to his brother, rocking him the way only someone who had done it 1,000 times knew how. Adrian knelt across from them, his voice low. "Luca, I need to tell you something." The boy looked up warily. "What?" Adrian hesitated, words heavy on his tongue. "I had a test done today, to know for sure. The truth is, you and Noah are my sons." Luca froze. His small body stiffened, eyes narrowing like he'd been struck. "No. Luca, you don't get to say that," the boy snapped, pulling Noah closer. His voice shook, but anger lit it sharp. "My dad left. He left Mom, he left us. If that was you, then why are you only here now? The words cut deeper than any corporate betrayal ever had. Adrian reached out, palms open. I didn't know. If I had, I never would have left you. I swear to you, I would have been there. Luca's chin quivered, but he held his glare. That's what everyone says. People leave, then come back with excuses. Adrian's throat tightened. He thought of his own childhood, of waiting at windows for parents who never returned, of promises that dissolved in silence. I can't erase the years I missed. I can't give you back the birthdays or nights I wasn't there to help. But I can be here now. I will be here now. Luca shook his head, gripping the baby tighter. How do I know you won't just change your mind? You have everything. Planes, money, houses. We're nothing. Why would you keep us? Adrian leaned closer, his voice breaking with honesty. Because you're mine, and because I need you as much as you need me. The boy faltered, the firelight catching the tears he tried to blink away. His small shoulders trembled under the weight of years he should never have carried. But his distrust was a wall built stone by stone, and it wouldn't fall in a single night. Then his eyes flicked to the table where both pocket watches rested side by side. He stared, silent, his breath uneven. His small hand reached out, tracing the engraving on Adrian's. His lips pressed tight, the anger in his face warring with something fragile. Longing. Adrian whispered, I've carried this my whole life. And somehow, you carried its twin. That means we were meant to find each other. For a long moment, Luca didn't move. Then, with a sharp breath, he yanked his hand back and buried his face against Noah's blanket. I don't believe you. Not yet. Adrian sat back, swallowing the ache. He knew this wasn't victory, but it wasn't rejection either. The boy hadn't run. He hadn't left. Trust would take time, and Adrian was ready to give every second he had left. The next morning dawned bright, the storm finally spent. Sunlight spilled through the glass walls, glinting on the snowdrifts piled high around the mansion. For once, Aspen Ridge was quiet, a white world untouched. Adrian woke early, drawn by the sound of laughter, soft, hesitant, but real. He stepped outside onto the patio and froze. In the yard, Luca was rolling a mound of snow with stubborn determination, his thin arms pushing until his cheeks flushed. Beside him, bundled in blankets and tucked safely in a stroller, Noah gurgled at the sight. Adrian walked toward them, the cold air biting his lungs. What are you doing out here so early? Luca didn't stop. Building a snowman. Mom used to say, if you could make something happy out of snow, then you could survive anything. Adrian's chest tightened. Without asking, he knelt and began shaping another mound. His broad hands packed the snow solid, stacking it with care. Luca shot him a wary glance but didn't protest. Together, they worked in silence, side by side, their breaths misting in the cold. Adrian carved a smile into the snowman's face, while Luca jammed sticks for arms. For the first time, the boy's lips curved upward. Not quite trust, but something close. When they finished, Luca stood back, brushing snow from his gloves. He looks almost like you, he muttered, eyes darting to Adrian's square jawline, then back to the snowman. Adrian chuckled softly, a sound that surprised even him. Then I suppose I should be proud. The boy's mouth twitched. He didn't look away this time. Later, as the sun dipped low, they sat by the fire inside. Adrian placed Noah gently in his crib, then turned to find Luca watching him intently. Why do you still carry that watch? Luca asked suddenly. Adrian pulled the polished silver heirloom from his pocket, turning it in his palm. Because it's the last thing my father gave me. He told me to keep warm, no matter how cold life got. His voice softened. It reminded me I wasn't completely forgotten. Luca hesitated, then pulled his own watch from under his shirt. The chain clinked softly as he laid it beside Adrian's. For a moment, the two gleamed together, almost as if they'd always belonged side by side. The boy's voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad." Adrian stilled, breath caught in his chest. Luca's eyes glistened, but his chin lifted stubbornly. "I'll try, but if you leave us, I'll never forgive you." Adrian reached across the table, covering Luca's small hand with his own. His deep blue eyes held steady, no longer the mask of a CEO, but the raw gaze of a man stripped to the truth. "I will not leave you. Not ever again." The word hung in the air, fragile and powerful. Dad. Adrian let it sink into his soul, a sound more valuable than every deal, every empire. For the first time in years, the house no longer felt empty. News travels fast in Aspen Ridge. By the next morning, headlines blared across financial feeds and tabloids alike. North Star CEO hiding secret children. Blizzard brings scandal to Glass Mansion. Adrian sat in his study, jaw clenched as he scrolled through article after article. Photos of his house, blurred images of Luca and Noah taken from afar, already splashed across the internet. His board members had wasted no time. A dozen emails filled his inbox. Damage control, public statement, delay the merger. The phone rang. He answered. "Adrian!" barked Richard Keene, chairman of North Star's board. "What the hell is going on? We've got investors calling in panic, and you're splashed across the front page with kids no one knew existed." Adrian's voice was steady, but ice threaded it. "They're not a scandal. They're my sons." A heavy pause. "Sons? Since when?" "Since always," Adrian said, leaning forward, his hand tightening around the pocket watch in his palm. "I didn't know until now, but I won't deny them. Not to you, not to anyone." "You're jeopardizing $1 billion deal," Richard snapped. "This merger depends on clean optics. Do you understand? Investors don't care about sob stories. They care about stability." Adrian's jaw set. "Then they'll see the truth. Stability doesn't come from lies. It comes from standing for something that matters." "Adrian." He ended the call before the argument could spiral further. The house felt smaller, the storm outside replaced by one inside his company. Behind him, Luca's voice broke the silence. "They don't want us here, do they?" Adrian turned. Luca stood in the doorway, clutching Noah in his arms. His eyes, sharp for his age, carried the weight of what he'd overheard. "They'll try to make me choose," Adrian admitted, "but I've already made my choice." Luca frowned. "And if they take everything from you?" Adrian stepped closer, crouching so he met the boy's gaze directly. "Then they take it. I've built and rebuilt before, but I won't rebuild without you." The boy blinked, surprise flashing through his guarded stare. His grip on Noah tightened, as if testing whether Adrian's words would hold. Just then, Adrian's phone buzzed again. This time it was Marcus. He answered. "They're digging deep," Marcus said. "Your rivals are feeding the press. They'll try to paint this as negligence, abandonment. It could get ugly fast." Adrian glanced at his sons, Noah cooing, Luca standing stiff with fear. His decision crystallized. "Then let it get ugly," Adrian said firmly. "I'm not hiding them." He hung up, straightened, and exhaled. For years, he had fought to protect his empire with silence and control. But tonight, the battle would be fought with truth. And for the first time, Adrian felt ready. The press storm didn't wait. By the next morning, camera crews lined the road outside the mansion gates. Headlines screamed across every channel. CEO, Westcott's hidden family, abandoned sons found in blizzard. Scandal threatens merger. Inside, Adrian stood tall in the entry hall, Luca clinging to Noah just behind him. The weight of choice pressed on his chest, heavier than any boardroom decision. His phone buzzed with messages, lawyers urging silence, PR teams drafting denials. But Adrian knew lies would only carve deeper wounds. He buttoned his navy jacket, adjusted his red tie, and opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Microphones thrust forward, questions fired like bullets. "Mr. Westcott, are those children yours?" Did you abandon them? Will you step down as CEO? Adrian raised his hand, the crowd quieting under the authority in his voice. These boys, Luca and Noah, are my sons. I didn't know until fate put them on my doorstep during the storm, but I will not hide them. Not from you, not from anyone. Gasps rippled through the reporters. Adrian continued, his deep blue eyes steady, the fire in his voice unshakable. I've spent years building companies, moving numbers, securing legacies, but none of it matters compared to family. That is the only legacy worth keeping. He paused, then pulled from his pocket the gleaming silver watch. Holding it up, he let the cameras capture the engraving. Keep warm. Dad. He glanced back at Luca, who still held the worn twin. This watch was my father's reminder that no one should face the cold alone. Today, I make a promise. My sons will never face it alone again. The crowd erupted, questions colliding, flashes bursting like lightning. But Adrian didn't flinch. He turned back into the house, shutting the door on the frenzy outside. Luca stared at him, wide-eyed, uncertain. You told the whole world, he whispered. Adrian knelt before him, resting a steady hand on his shoulder. Because the world needed to hear it, and so did you. For the first time, something shifted in Luca's expression, his suspicion giving way to trust. Fragile, but real. He looked at Noah, then back at Adrian. You really mean it, don't you? Adrian's eyes softened. With everything I have. The boy swallowed hard, then leaned forward, pressing his forehead briefly against Adrian's shoulder. It wasn't a full embrace, but it was the first step, and in that small moment, Adrian knew he had won something greater than any merger. He had begun to win his sons. The storm outside had broken, but inside Adrian's home, warmth grew in ways he had never known. Days later, the mansion buzzed with quiet life, Luca's footsteps echoing through hallways once silent, Noah's soft cries filling the air with need and presence. For the first time, Adrian Westcott's house sounded like a home. On the evening of Luca's 9th birthday, a birthday the boy had never expected to celebrate, Adrian set the long oak table with care. Balloons, a cake frosted with shaky letters, and gifts wrapped in paper he had fumbled to tape himself. The air smelled of vanilla and wax candles. Luca walked in, his eyes widening. This is for me? Adrian smiled, dressed in his navy suit but without the armor of business. For both of you. For every year I missed, and for every one I won't miss again. The boy hesitated, then slowly sat, Noah gurgling beside him in a high chair Adrian had ordered. The cake's candles flickered in the dim light. Adrian lit the last wick, then slid a small box across the table. Go on, he urged gently. Luca opened it. Inside lay the silver pocket watch, Adrian's heirloom, now engraved with 3 names, Adrian, Luca, Noah. The boy's breath caught. His fingers brushed the cool metal, trembling. You gave me yours? Our family doesn't need 2, Adrian said softly. He placed the second weathered watch beside it. Now we carry 1, together. Luca's lips trembled, his dark eyes glistening. He looked up at Adrian, his voice breaking. No one's ever given me something that meant anything. Adrian reached across the table, his hand steady over Luca's. Then let this be the first, and not the last. The boy swallowed hard, then whispered, Dad. The word landed heavier than any billion-dollar deal, stronger than any empire Adrian had built. His chest swelled, tears threatening, as Noah squealed with innocent joy. Adrian pulled both boys into his arms, the watch pressing between them like a vow carved into silver. Family, he whispered, his voice thick. That's the only legacy worth keeping. The candles burned low, the cake untouched for the moment. In that room, for the first time, Adrian's life felt full, of laughter, of love, of something money could never buy back. Spring crept quietly into Aspen Ridge. The towering pines shed their coats of snow, streams of meltwater ran down the mountain roads, and the glass walls of Adrian Westcott's mansion reflected sunlight instead of storms. The house, once cold and silent, now pulsed with life. In the garden, Luca chased bubbles that shimmered in the crisp air, his laughter carrying across the lawn. Noah sat in the grass nearby, clapping his tiny hands at the floating colors. Their joy filled spaces that had long been hollow. Adrian stood at the edge of the patio, his tailored suit jacket off, sleeves rolled to his forearms. He watched his sons with a quiet awe that never seemed to fade. For years he had believed his empire was built on glass and steel, but now he knew better. It was built here, on fragile trust, on second chances, on family. Marcus Hale arrived, leaning against the gate with a grin. "Quite the change," he remarked. "Your board thought you'd crumble under the headlines. Instead, you've never looked stronger." Adrian smiled faintly. "Let them see. I've lived behind glass long enough. It's time the world knows who I really am." He reached into his pocket and drew out the pocket watch, now engraved with 3 names. Sunlight glinted off the silver as he thumbed the inscription: Adrian, Luca, Noah. Marcus nodded toward the boys. "You going to tell them about the foundation?" Adrian's eyes softened. "Tonight." Later that evening, he gathered Luca and Noah by the fire. Luca sat upright, Noah resting against his chest. Adrian held the watch out between them. "This," he said gently, "has always reminded me to keep warm, even in the coldest times. But warmth doesn't come from fire or walls. It comes from here." He touched his chest, then Luca's. "From family." He told them about the Warm Door Foundation, his pledge of $50 million to protect abandoned children during winter crises. Luca's eyes widened. "So, kids like us won't be alone in the snow?" Adrian nodded, his throat tight. "No one should ever knock on a door and be turned away. Not again." The boy's gaze lingered on him, then softened into something fragile, yet real: trust. Slowly, he leaned against Adrian's side, his voice small. "Then maybe we were meant to find you." Adrian wrapped an arm around his son, pulling both boys close. His deep blue eyes glistened as he whispered, "You didn't just find me. You saved me." Outside, the last of the snow melted into earth. Inside, the mansion rang with laughter, with love, with the sound of a family reborn. For Adrian Westcott, once the loneliest man in Aspen Ridge, the greatest legacy was no longer his empire. It was 2 boys who had changed everything.